Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Unstuck movement. I am your host, Rob Z. This platform is created for you to find the power, the strength, the perseverance to break those chains that have been holding you back from things in your life. So the things that have been holding you down, if you're looking for breakthrough, right, you need to break those chains to pass that glass ceiling, to break through that plateau and get to a new level of breakthrough for yourself. Today, I have an amazing guest on here. And what I love to do is bring guests on who have experienced this great breakthrough in their lives so they can give you an example of what that breakthrough is like. So you can have real life proof that it's happened for others so it can happen for you. So from navigating the depths of the ocean as a submariner in the Navy in his 20s to serving God as a preacher from behind a pulpit in his 30s, Daniel Whitworth has journeyed through diverse terrains before settling into the world of online business with his company, Whitworth Workflow Automations, alongside his devoted wife and co-parent of 6 amazing children. I want to welcome Daniel to the Unstuck movement. Thank you for being here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. Really cool to have you on here. We've had a few conversations before this, and I just really enjoy what you do for businesses, but also what you've done with your life and how you've molded your life to where it is today, and you've gotten yourself unstuck. And I love to ask a powerful question that leads to powerful answers. And your question is by far the best question I've ever had on the Unstuck movement, because this question is so good. And when I read it, I was like, man, it speaks to me because I've been there before. When you melt into the carpet, how do you clean it up? Which somebody might see that question and be like, what the heck does that
even mean? Right. Yeah.
But I read it and knew right away. So talk about that for yourself. What does that question mean for you? Why were you melting into the carpet? And how has that led to this story?
So yeah, those that have been there know what that means, but it was straight up depression. I was never clinically diagnosed or anything, but it was a time in my life when I literally just felt no purpose, no reason for existing, no hope for the future, just all that of like, why even go on? Can I just melt into this carpet and just dissolve into nothing? That was kind of how I felt at the time. And so what brought it on, I mean, totally first world problems, but you know what I always tell people, like, you know what? Problems in the first world feel just as real as in the third world. So, but anyway, so yeah, as my backstory goes, I was in the Navy for a decade. I was a pastor for a decade. And then in 2019, just before COVID hit, I stepped out of ministry full time, and my wife and I moved. So we did 3 things. I completely changed my career. We moved cities, same area, but across a bridge tunnel that no one ever drives across. So it's almost like I'm in a different state. And then we also had our 6th and final baby around that time in 2020. And any psychologist will tell you that any one of those is a good trigger for depression. And I was like, I can handle 3 of them, baby, bring them. So I do love change, but I think that might have been too much for me. And so the major shift that happened for me what's cool is like when we talked about this podcast, I went back through my journal to try to remember like all of this stuff, because I'm the kind of person that I like to just put the past behind me and move forward. I don't like think about it. So I had to like go back and remember these things. And so really it was a lot of different things happened for me. The change in career went from me being a person of authority, of some sort of, influence. I had people that followed me, that listened to me every week as I preached, to suddenly being home, hanging out in my pajamas with 6 kids that don't listen to a word I say. So a major shift of just sense of significance, sense of importance, and all that totally flip-flopped there. Another thing that was happening was money was a challenge. So I went from having full-time income to now let's try this on our own. And so we did find success eventually, but there was certainly a period of time when it was questionable, when we're looking at the money running out. And so there's stress. My wife takes on money stress more than I do. But at the time, for me, I felt helpless because
Mm.
it wasn't just that we didn't have money coming, it's that I wasn't providing any of it. So just so people know, like when we switched to online business, it was her business. It was a nursing tutoring business. She's the nurse. I did some tech in the background, but really it was her. She was finally getting to be the provider to do the work, and I became the stay-at-home dad of 6 kids that we homeschool. And so there wasn't even a break in the day when they were gone. And we had a baby, like a brand new baby, which is not my favorite age of a child to take care of. And so, yeah, I got stripped of my influence and position. And then I got stripped of my ability to provide, my actual feeling of contribution to the family, which of course I equated to financial and not the other things that a dad does, right? And then a third thing was changing, and I'll try to keep this PG. But basically, we were 6 kids in, and I didn't want to have a new one just yet. And so we were trying the whole natural family planning method of birth control, which basically equals abstinence for most of the time. And so that was another thing that was usually pretty regular. 6 kids, you can guess, right? And it became very not regular. And so that source of pride and feeling like a man and all that kind of stuff was also stripped from me. And probably after about the first year of me really trying to change it, like I did a podcast. I was like trying to find speaking engagements. I was doing all kinds of things to try to like salvage this sense of purpose and meaning and really career concept, until it really just probably about a year later just finally just got to the point where I quit the podcast. I even, so Facebook, I unfriended everybody. Like, wow. I just went into a literal, it's in my journal, I decided to go into a time of obscurity, kind of like Moses going into the wilderness concept. I think that's where the idea came from. And so I like completely dropped out of Facebook. Didn't just like deactivate my account. I unfriended everyone except for like close family.
It's interesting because I mean, most people just go through and shut their account off. Mm-hmm. The unfriending takes a lot more work. So it had to be much more cathartic to be going through and just unfriending people.
Like, I never talked to this person. Bye. And it wasn't like I didn't like them or anything. It's just like I really felt the need to not have an audience. Because that's what I realized is I've been living for an audience. A church audience, Facebook audience. Like, instead of living in here, I was very much depending on living out there. And I just realized I need to turn that off and focus on me, which was probably the best and worst thing I could do at the time, because then I had to really face my demons. And that was probably for the next year. So this would been 2022, really just struggling and feeling. There were literal days where I didn't want to get out of bed, didn't want to do anything, I didn't want to make dinner. I just would, we have a big beanbag chair in our den, and I would just go flop in that with my face down and just like dream of melting into the carpet. And if I wasn't doing that, I was rewatching the old 1960s Mission Impossible series over and over again, because there's no emotional commitment to that. And so, yeah, that was the melting into the carpet period of my life.
I don't mean to laugh, man, but it's some of that really is funny. But also at the same time, this is really, I didn't expect this to happen on this episode. I spent 20 years in broadcasting, right? So I was on radio for 20 years. And when I left radio, coming up on 7 years ago, and over the course of the next maybe 2 or 3 years leading into the pandemic, I didn't realize, you said you had a need to not have an audience. Mm-hmm. And I've been going through that, man. The past like 2 years, I really I tried to reinvest myself in, because I left radio and then started the digital marketing company. Mm-hmm. And so I was like engulfed in like radio. So like people speaking and people listening to me and interacting, and then digital marketing. I was doing the podcast there, and I was also doing lots of videos for people and stuff like that. So I was so engulfed in it, and I was like, man, I don't want to have this audience anymore. I need to like totally disconnect from all of this. And I'm leading this into a question for you, because what happened was, as I totally like I disconnected from social media 3 or 4 times, and I was depressed when I was on social media, but then I was also kind of depressed when I was off of it. And I was like, what is happening to me? Like, what is going on here? Like, I feel a desire to not be putting myself out there, but then I also am sad that I'm not putting myself out there. It was like you said, like Moses in the wilderness. That's kind of what it was. Like, that's when I started this podcast. The reason I started this was I know I'm called to make content. I mean, I wouldn't have been in broadcasting for 20 years if I wasn't, right? But it has to be purposeful, and it has to have a meaning behind it. It has to have something that will inspire somebody and help them, instead of just satisfying and gratifying me. And so it was just, when you were talking about that, it just dawned on me, holy cow, man, I went through that in a different scenario, but in a similar way. And it did lead me through like this period of loss in the wilderness, and this period of depression. Yeah. Obscurity. What did the obscurity do for you as you came out of it? Right. Because I know it like took you into this difficult place, but what has it done as you've gone through it?
Well, what it really did for me was it forced me to go inside and just face up. It forced me to look in the mirror and nowhere else. And that's hard to do, because it's easy, especially when you live in front of other people and you have an audience. It's easy to just be that's the person that you like to be. It's the person you see in your own video. It's the voice you hear in your audio recordings and all that kind of stuff. But it's not the real you. It's the person you. Yeah, we try to be authentic and all that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, we all know how to make a presentation. When I get on stage and preach, it is the real me, but it's also not. You know what I'm saying? And so it really forced me to like look in the mirror and realize that I'm not fooling anybody. And it was hard. But I tell you what brought me out of it, what began the bringing out of it. Because another thing I'd gotten away from is we stopped going to church. So I was a pastor. I was burned out, honestly. I was burned out. I was jaded a bit. Probably had a little PTSD, if you've ever been a pastor and then stopped. There's a lot of things about being a pastor that are not very fun, and not very, people betray you and things like that. But anyway, so where I was going with this is that I had basically said, I'm going to take a break from God too. And, so we funny thing is, when we moved because of a church. I had stepped out of full-time ministry, and then there was this church far away I was looking at joining, and ended up stopped doing that because of different reasons, and thought, I'll start a home church, and that kind of fizzled. And so then just started doing, we'll do a thing as a family. And then I got irritated when the kids wouldn't read their chapters. And I kept trying to like make church still happen, but not. And it finally actually came to a head one day when, this is kind of embarrassing, I got real irritated because like no one else was doing anything to set up for church. We did communion and stuff, and I just got mad and was like, man, if I don't do it, then no one will. And it felt like I was pastor again. If I don't do the work, then no one else is going to do it. And so I just like stormed out of the house and like drove off. And anyway, that kind of changed it. So then Nicole took over the duties, and eventually over the while, it just kind of fizzled into nothing. And so I wasn't in the Word. I wasn't talking to God. I wasn't in church or anything like that. And so it was really just me and my own misery. And what had happened is, so we had gotten involved in this. So this is kind of a business side thing. So we had gotten involved in this coaching program. So part of that, so going into online business for ourselves, involved investing in this coaching program called Flip Lifestyle. And that actually worked really well. Over 6 months, we grew our business from nothing to making a full-time income with it. Like, very awesome. We became friends with the coach. His name's Shane Sams. And in this community called Flip Lifestyle, there's a bunch of other people that are also starting online businesses. That's the whole point of it, is like helping you build and grow an online business. And so one of the other members of this community that had been promoted by our friend Shane was a guy that did a thing called Real Men 300. And it was an online men's group, ministry men's group. And so I think Nicole had told me about it at one point in time. And my wife's awesome. Just, she is a a saint. Like, she knows how to navigate these things, and she did a great job, honestly, of not pushing me, but also trying to, like, you know, nudge just enough so I wouldn't get upset and bite back, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, she did this Real Men 300 thing, and probably months later, as the depression was just like getting worse and worse, I finally decided, you know what, I'll give it a shot. I'll give it a shot. So I went ahead and signed up. I'm kind of a little bit impulsive about things like that. And just like one day I was like, all right, I'll do it. Did it, paid for it. I'm in. And I started, and it started with a 30-day, like, get in the word challenge. And I did it. And there was like a journaling process and everything like that. And there was this men's group. We met every week. And it was just exactly what I needed. Just exactly what I needed to start there. It wasn't like an immediate, like, poof, I'm out of it. It was like, it was the beginning. It started the process of, getting out of this stuck position. And so, yeah, I definitely credit, and, the Lord knows what he's doing, and he orchestrates our steps even when we're not paying any attention to it. Right. And so, and now I'm not still in that group. It served its purpose for a time, and things like that. But that was the beginning of the getting unstuck, getting out of the wanting to melt into the carpet. It was really, what I really had to do, and I'm still doing it actually, even a few years later, is I had to basically rediscover my relationship with God. Is what it came down to, because I had this theology. I had this way of thinking about God that was very much tied into church and preaching and all this kind of stuff. And so I really needed almost this time in the wilderness, I think, to effectively disconnect from that concept of God and my relationship with that concept of God, and begin a journey that I still don't think is finished, that probably never will be, is discovering who God really is and what my relationship really is to him. And over the past few years now, since that moment with the Real Men 300, it's gone through many iterations. I've done some different exploring into Eastern meditation kind of stuff. And like, I've tried and explored different things to be like, all right, God, who are you really? And I'm still settling on that question, honestly. But I think that getting back to the fundamental question that I wasn't asking all that time that I was depressed was, God, who are you? And I think that's the fundamental question we all humans have to wrestle with at some point in time. And it comes at different phases. It comes in different circumstances. But I think if I really think about it, that fundamental question is the one that God had to put me through something so that I would ask that question instead of assuming I knew the answer.
Man, fascinating. That's really, really good stuff. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate also your vulnerability with all this, because that's really, it's refreshing, nice to hear, and lets the audience into like the process, because you went into like a lot of the process there of going through all that. Because, as you're going through difficult things and wilderness times in your life, it's like, am I ever going to come out of this freaking thing? Like, is this ever going to end? Like,
exactly.
Why is this happening for such a long period of time? But to God, a day is a century, or I forget this expression, right? But
1,000 years, yeah. I always looked at Moses, and like, his obscurity time was 40 years. 40. And it's just a sentence. It's a little blurb in the Bible. It's just one little line for 40 years. And I'm like, God, don't make mine that long, please.
and your 40 years is a sentence, right? That
Exactly.
period of time is a sentence, because you kind of have to go through that. It's not, thinking about that too. 40 years is interesting too, because it's like a generation. Right. 40 years is like a generation. So to get something out of, maybe like a bloodline or something like that, it takes a generation to do that. And so I think for myself also, like, please don't take me through 40 years of something, but at the same time, like, just a couple of years can feel like 40 years, because I can't imagine what 40 years feels like. Okay. So there's a couple of things that I want to ask you. We're going to jump into the sponsor, the Connected Leaders Academy, here real quick, and give Jose Escobar and the crew a shout out, because they've made a huge impact in my life. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about what came on the other side of the wilderness, the church that you started, right? by community and
Yeah.
community in your neighborhood, and discussing how that has impacted your life and those around you. So let's do that here in 1 second.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world, globally, all across the country, high performers, titans of industry. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line, and of course, grow your circle and your network like never before, this is where you want to be. Join the Connected Leaders Academy today. We are scaling massively. We want to welcome you in. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JAESCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
So we talk about getting unstuck. For you, this when we were talking before, I was so fascinated by this part of your story that you decided to just build something within your community that would bring people together. And that's all I'm going to say about it. I want you to talk about it, explain it, because I love the concept, and it's amazing what you've done just in your area.
Okay, sure. So I got to back up a little bit. So I'm a pastor, right? I spent 5 years as an administrative pastor, which means I'm running everything, not doing the preaching, but I'm running everything. And then like 5 years into it, that pastor says, "Hey, here's the church. I'm leaving." It was more than that, but that's a short version. And I become the senior pastor. I'm preaching. And about 2.5 years into that, like 5 years of the preaching part, one of my associates went to this conference in Florida and came back saying that they'd done some demographics and studies and all that, and found that our local area of Hampton Roads, Virginia, which is where I live, upwards of 80% of the population is not in church. And that's actually true of most, larger metropolitan areas, is that like not 50, not 60, but like 80 to 90% of people are just not in church anymore. And you can see it in all the empty churches out there.
Yeah.
And that just like hit me like a ton of bricks. It was
especially because when you're in the world of church, you think like, oh, everybody kind of like goes to church.
Yeah.
That number, like that's 80 to 90% is like staggering.
And not only that, because when you're working in church, like what's your goal? Your goal is to get people to come to your church, and you hold these events and you do all this stuff to be inviting and welcoming and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, that ain't working. That ain't working at all. And not only that, but so I'm an engineer, actually. I'll get into the business stuff later, but I'm an engineer by default or my nature. And I was like, well, this ain't working. And not only that, but it's like, well, then how are we reaching those people? And it broke my heart, honestly, which surprised me, because I had never felt myself as being a super evangelistic type of person. I was more of like, deal with the people who are believers and help them live right kind of mindset. But it surprisingly broke my heart that we have so many people out there that are just simply not being reached at all. Because guess what? The only way us churches know how to reach people is bring them on Sunday morning, invite a friend, all this stuff. And it's like, they're not coming. They're not coming. So how are they going to know about the good news? Right. And so that started a journey over the last 2.5 years of my ministry time of just deconstructing in my mind of like, what are we doing? What else is out there? How are we reaching people? And I had a conversation with a pastor friend of mine, and he connected me with this other guy. And it turns out there's this thing called missional community. And so I was like, oh, what's that? And so I started meeting with this guy. He gave me some books to read. And over the course of a couple of years, it got basically what missional community is instead of setting up a church on the corner and holding services on Sunday, you become a missionary to your neighborhood or your network. And the goal is not to get them to come to your church, like straight up not. The goal is for you to pretend in a way like you're in a foreign country and you don't have a church to bring them to. And what you can't do is you can't stand on the corner and preach at them. You have to acclimate yourself and become one of them so that you can slowly influence them by prayer and love and to ultimately see that they come to know Christ. And the process is like this, is that, Jesus said in John chapter 6 twice, He said, no one can come to me unless the Father draws them. And no one can come to me unless the Father enables them. This is that whole, where he's doing the eat my flesh and drink my blood speech.
Mhm.
And people start leaving, and his disciples are like, what's going on here? And he says that to them. And so if that's true, because we believe what Jesus says, then that means there's not a dang thing you and I can do to save anybody. Not a thing. We can preach perfectly. We can have a most absolutely perfect presentation of the gospel and present it to somebody. But if God has not unlocked their heart and drawn them to him, it won't work, because you and I can't change a heart. We can't save anybody. But God likes to use us in the process to be there and available when he does that. Okay.
Mhm.
And so the whole premise of missional community is not that I go out trying to preach at people. In fact, the topic of God and Jesus and any of that doesn't even come up unless they ask, because that's the other thing in the scriptures. Always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have when they ask. When they ask, because when they ask, guess what happened?
Right.
God unlocked their heart and drew them, right?
Well, and it goes right to coaching too, because, in coaching, there's not really, you're guiding people towards answers for themselves. You guide them to ask the right questions to find the right answers for themselves.
Yep.
You can't force anybody to do anything or figure anything out. So the more that you try to do it, the less it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's exactly the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people are only ready to learn when they're ready to learn, not when you're ready to teach, right?
Yeah.
And so so I read some books and met some people and really got to a point where I just could not do the Sunday morning thing anymore. I was like, I'm just preaching to the choir, preaching to people who've been in church for 20 years and still can't articulate a thing from the scripture, because they're used to the passive, I call it the come, sit, listen, and leave approach to church. Come, sit, listen, leave. Maybe you feel something. And I realized that what I'm doing, all this stuff, I'm just entertaining them. Like it's not a whole lot different than watching a TV show. And now you can do your church on TV more than you could before. And so it's like, but it has no effect on your daily life. Anyway, I could go on and on about that, but I'm not going to. The point is that when we moved up to across the water, I felt I was like, hey, this is a nice neighborhood. It seems very small. It's quiet and, it's not busy and all that kind of stuff. And so I just got it in my head, like, well, the way you do a missional community is, well, you got to get people to like hang out with. And so we're just going to do a block party. And so we had a block party. I think it was on Memorial Day in 2022. Yeah. So I started this kind of in the middle of my depression, honestly, because I just felt like I was trying to do something. And I was pretty sure God wanted me to do this. And so I was like, hey, let's just start this process. So I started to have block party, burgers in the backyard, all that kind of thing. And what I was doing up until that point, one thing I was doing even during the depression time was I was going for regular walks. I was walking around my neighborhood like every morning for exercise and making a point to actually engage in conversation with anyone that I happened to see outside, which wasn't usually a whole lot of people, because people don't go outside and hang out in their front yards anymore.
Right.
But I did get a small smattering of people. And then a very interesting thing happened shortly before we were going to do the block party. Was I caught my back fence on fire. So, and that resulted in my other neighbors that touched that fence, which there were quite a few, us getting to know each other really fast. Basically, I had started doing fire pits, and I had never really done it before, but I'd always wanted to. And I made the mistake of, like, the ashes had burned overnight and I thought they were out. And so I dumped them behind the shed, which is in the backyard next to the fence, and there's leaves everywhere. Didn't think anything of it. Next thing I know, I got a neighbor knocking on my door. Hey, you burning leaves in the backyard? No, not that I know of. But you might want to check. So I go back and I'm like, oh my God, my fence base is in flames everywhere. I'm like, yeah. So someone had called the fire department. I tried putting out my hose. Anyway, long story short, that resulted in connecting with a lot of neighbors that I otherwise wouldn't have. And so I see that as a totally God thing. So yeah, we had a block party. And then, I don't know, maybe had 10 or 15 people show up, something like that. And then we just did it every month. And so we would tell the people that, hey, we're doing this again. We'd invite them again. And then I started doing an email list. And so we did it every month up until the cold months. And then we took a break, and then we did it again And then this year I got really smart, and because I was trying to figure out how do I reach all my neighbors, because it's like they're not always outside, and I started making flyers, and I'd put them in the mailboxes that were at least by the street, but a lot of them were up by the doors. I'm like, I don't want to be that weird guy that's like putting stuff, up by your door kind of thing, and I don't want to knock on doors because that's even more awkward.
Yeah.
And so then I learned that you can, from Zazzle, you can get custom sticky notes that are like 4x6, and it's a sticky note. And so I had those printed in a flyer, and I had my army of 6 kids literally put one on every single door in the neighborhood a few weeks before a block party. And on there's a link to like our Facebook group. I started a Facebook group in my email so they can RSVP. And so basically I've got the marketing down of actually trying to reach my neighbors. I'm not planning to do direct mail or anything like that. I'm just going to do this every time. And slowly over time is what the way this works. Slowly over time, people start coming, and they'll join the Facebook group, and they'll come to one and then maybe not the next 2. And then they'll come to another one. And then you got some that start coming regular. And so we're basically 3 years into this now. We've done 3 seasons. And we've got a pretty good collection of people, maybe 20 or so that are coming on a regular basis. But it's only monthly, and it's still outside, like in the backyard, burgers and stuff. And so the next phase of this, which we're going to implement probably this month or next month before it gets warm again, is more like a brunch instead of a block party. And a brunch is going to be inside. It's going to be around couches, around a table. And it's not a party. It's more of an opportunity for conversation. And still, we're not preaching. We're not handing out tracts or anything like that. It's literally just building relationships with people, loving them, helping them out if they need it. It's just being, and what's cool is like, it's a facilitation thing. It's really just it's providing an opportunity for lots of people to come together with at least one person in the group that knows God, that knows Jesus, so that God, and what we do is we pray that God opens their hearts and draws them to himself and say, Lord, we're here if they have any questions that you'd like us to answer. And we just talk about our story. We don't start, pull out a Bible and start ripping out the theology at them. Right. It's very much you just make friends.
Yeah.
You make friends with people, and you hope and pray they come to know Jesus, and you get to play a part in it. But the very important intentional part of that is that you make yourself available. You do these block parties or these brunches or whatever it is that maybe in whatever your context might be, and you're consistent about it. And you just wait and see what happens. And I heard a thing early on, and I'll finish with this. I heard a thing early on in this process. I was watching a conference or something like that, and the guy said, when you go into this doing missional community, you can't think of it like a church plant. A church plant, your typical church plant, needs to be self-sustaining in 3 years. That's kind of the goal of like church planting organizations and stuff. You get enough people coming and they're giving and all that sort of thing so that you can like continue Sunday morning services, self-sustaining, that kind of thing. And he says, in this missional community, go into it not expecting a single result until 10 years in. And by result, that means like a conversion. Wow. 10 years in. So go in basically with the mindset that like, I'm here as long as it takes. I don't ever plan on starting a church from this. I don't ever plan on certainly not taking donations or an offering from these people. But at these block parties, what's cool is that we're very intentional about, it's never just one directional. It's like, hey, we're going to have some burgers. You guys bring this stuff. It's always everyone contributes kind of thing, because we don't want it to feel like we're holding a church service. It's literally just, hey, we just like to have all of our neighbors together. We thought it'd be fun. Let's get together. Like we had a chili cook-off back in November. That was a lot of fun. And so, yeah, that's the process, is like you just settle in and recognize, we're going to be here for as long as God wants us to be here. And if he chooses to bring any people to himself through us, then we're here and available. Until such time, we're just going to try to love people and make ourselves available.
I love it, man. It's so cool just to hear like your story of how you got to where you are with this, and the fact that 10 years is the signpost for converting anybody is just, I mean, it's just the commitment, right? Just
Yeah.
committing to doing something.
It also
that-
takes the pressure off. I'll tell you
yeah,
that.
well, that
Like
really does take the pressure off.
the first, reaction to that is, oh my gosh, 10 years, that's forever. That's going to take so long. I'm going to have to work so hard. But then it's like, no, wait, that's the point. That there's no pressure on me to do a thing.
Well, and what I hear too, man, is because they say when you master something, right, it's like 10 years or 10,000 hours. And I always think like there's so much truth in that. And so what I hear in that 10 years also is, well, now it's 10,000 hours, 10 years of learning how to talk to people, communicate, not being pushy, making friends, making real connections, actually caring about people, and doing something consistently over that period of time. So you become a real people person who loves to help people and serve people and bring people together. So that's also, I think, in that 10 years, like that's a big piece of that too, is like, wow, this is an opportunity for me to be an expert at serving others and bringing them together and facilitating conversation, because that's where all the magic happens. Communication is where magic happens.
Yeah.
It's so good, man. It's really, really good. And I know you had given me some resources when we talked. If people want information about how to get started in something like that, how do they find that stuff?
The best resource that I know of that I love is called The Tangible Kingdom. The Tangible Kingdom. It's a book by Hugh Halter. And there's certainly other resources out there. He's written several other books, but that book to me is both a why do this and a how to do this. And it's my favorite one. There's lots of other ones I could recommend. If anyone ever had a conversation with me about this, I'd be happy to talk about it. I love the topic. But The Tangible Kingdom by Hugh Halter is a great starting point for anybody.
So I feel like there's so much more that I want to ask you, but we got to wrap this episode up. And I do want to have you come back on for the Unstuck business also, because we didn't even touch on the workflow wizard and how you help people and businesses with their workflow, which is, I mean, I can't imagine how insanely helpful that also is.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions I wrote down here. There's one thing I guess I want to touch on before we sign off, because I'm trying to figure out which is the best one to ask. I love the quote that you wrote. So, when I have somebody come on, I ask them for a quote or saying that they live by. And yours is, losers make excuses, winners make choices.
Yeah.
And what does that mean to you in your life, right? I love the story of how you got unstuck and the wilderness, the depression that you were in. Who was the loser who was making the excuses, that version of you, and the winner that makes choices? The night and day of that for you, what has that been like?
Yeah, so that is something I live by and try to teach my kids when they're making lots of excuses why they can't do something. But for me, that was a time where I was just kind of making excuses. Well, I can feel this way because I don't have a job. I can feel this way because, I'm not, having lots of relations with my wife, or, all those things. It's like you can easily wallow in your circumstances and be like, and then the question, of course, is like, why don't you do something about it? If your answer is anything but, well, I can and I'm going to, then that's an excuse, because at the end of the day, you can do something. It's choices. I choose to melt into the carpet.
Yeah.
Regardless of how I feel, I can choose to go bury my face in the beanbag or watch Mission Impossible endlessly, or I can choose to do something, or I can choose to try something, or like join the Real Men 300 or something like that. And so it's not like I'm perfect at that all the time by any stretch of the imagination, but that's something that is that mantra that I really try to teach my kids is like, if you want to be anything in this world, if you want to have control over your life as opposed to being a victim, don't make excuses, make choices.
Yeah, and the mantra thing was like, well, I don't think anybody who even has a mantra in their life lives by it 24/7, 365, right? But it's something that's a recurring theme that you come back to when you're stuck in a certain place. If people want to reach out to you, I know they can go to theworkflowwiz.com. They can go on Facebook, The Workflow Wizard. Those are the best ways to get a hold of you?
Yeah, or you could just email me, Daniel@danielwhitworth.com. That's my email address. So if that's all
Cool.
right.
All right.
I'm open to talk to anybody. Yep.
Awesome. All those details are also in the bio for this episode, man. Thank you for your story. Thank you, Daniel. I'm so glad that we met each other, and
Yeah,
I
man.
loved the story of how you've made this happen for you. I just want to thank you for being a part of the Unstuck movement.
My pleasure. My pleasure.